What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today is officially the last day we're going to be working on the WRX before we get it tuned. I wanted to go ahead and get the whole thing washed and cleaned up, mainly just the windshield because you couldn't see anything out of it. It's been sitting for a while, so I had a whole bunch of pollen, just dust on it from everyone driving around. So I wanted to get it cleaned off so I could actually see out of the car and so that it didn't look totally like crap. But that being said, I don't really care about the paint too much because I do plan on either painting it or wrapping it at some point. I mean, just check this out. The clear coat has gotten really bad. It was like this when I bought the car, but it's gotten really bad. It's all just kind of flaking off. Plus, there's just other spots on the car that aren't in the best condition, and I plan on changing this trunk out for a different trunk because this is a fiberglass trunk and it just doesn't seal very well. So whenever it's raining, I also get a ton of water in the car because it doesn't seal very well and just kind of smells. Not to mention they didn't complete the install, so in order to open the trunk you have to go in through the back seat, which is a pain in the butt. But the last thing I want to do before I tune the car was get some gauges in the car, specifically a boost gauge and a wideband gauge. So there's a few popular spots where people like to put gauges in the WRXs. The first is right up here, which is a triple mount gauge cluster. The second most popular would be the pillar clusters, which would go right along here. Or there's a couple companies that make a gauge cluster insert for right here, and you get a gauge on each side. So I decided to go with the internal gauge cluster pods. And I kind of have the boost gauge sitting right here, and this is basically what it's going to look like in the car. The only thing I don't really like about this gauge cluster is the fact that the back isn't open all the way. My boost gauge right here, it has 2 bolt mounting points, and then it has the boost nipple right here, and not having an open back just kind of gets in the way. So at some point I might go ahead and just cut this out, but the boost gauge comes with these hoods right here. So basically what I did is I just mounted it out a little bit so that these things have plenty of clearing in the back, and it's really easy mounting. You just throw, it comes with these rubber bands, you throw the rubber band around the gauge and you pop it in and it keeps it in place, and you have a little bit of a rotatable adjustment. And because I have the 2 bolt studs on this gauge, in order to get it to fit, you either have to space it out like this or you have to have it clocked so that the gauge is super crooked in the pod. So I'm thinking at some point I'm probably just going to cut those studs off, but for now this is going to work, and because it's mounted with the rubber bands, it's really easy to remove. You can just pop the whole thing out, so cutting the studs off at a later day won't be a big hassle. So to get this thing in, we first have to remove this guy, which is just 2 bolts on the top, and then I believe the whole thing just pulls out. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure, but we'll figure it out. Super easy if you have a stubby little screwdriver. Hardest part is getting the right angle, but it is angled enough. You can stick a long one in here, and it's basically at the correct angle so that the screwdriver can go right next to the steering pillar. 2 screws, and then I guess we just pull. So just make sure you drop the steering wheel, and then the whole thing just comes out like that. And this is the stock one. I am curious because you have this little flap. I didn't look at the back one, but we'll see if it has these little mounting points right here to see if this will swap over to the aftermarket one. But we have plenty of room for the wiring to go right in here. I am going to go ahead and remove the whole gauge cluster because it's going to make wiring and everything way easier. So let's go ahead and pull that real fast, and then we'll figure out the wiring. You will need a longer screwdriver. You won't be able to use a stubby one to get this thing out. So there we are, it's out. Plugs do go in the top and not in the back like a lot of other cars. So you just angle the whole thing back, then you can reach your hand back there, unplug all of them, and then the whole thing comes out. And now we have all this room back here to do our wiring. I think what I'm going to do is actually pull the clock, because I do plan on doing the 3-pod mount up here as well for oil pressure, oil temp, and then I'll have a 3rd gauge. I'm not 100% sure, I haven't decided totally on the 3rd gauge, but I wanted my wideband and my boost gauge to be right in front of me, easy to see, and just easy to monitor. And then my oil gauges will be at the top. You don't have to keep an eye on them 100% of the time. It's just something to keep an eye on. So I just kind of figured being on the gauge cluster is the perk spot for those is just right in front of your face, and then the oil gauges and stuff will go in the middle of the dash. So because of that, I'm thinking we can just take this out and rob the power from the clock and use that to power the displays of the gauge. So don't do what I did. This thing's pretty brittle and I totally snapped the two bottom mounts off. But anyways, here's the wiring for that. So we'll go ahead and get a voltmeter and I'll figure out which one's the power, and then we'll go ahead and start wiring the gauges up. First though, I need to find my wideband gauge because I'm not sure where it went. Well guys, I ran into a little bit of an issue. So I think I mentioned earlier that I had this installed on another car, and this wideband has a 6-pin connector that I seem to be missing. I don't know if I accidentally threw it away or what, but unfortunately I can't install the wideband without it, and I don't really want to install the boost gauge until I have the wiring for the wideband, because it's all going to be wired together in the same spot. So I'm going to wait so I can do it correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and order a little wiring pigtail, and then we'll go ahead and install it all once that gets in. So I'll go ahead and see you in a few. So now we can wire the whole thing up. First thing first though, I want to install the wideband sensor. And then I want to run the vacuum tube as well. Wideband sensor is going to be really easy to install. It just installs in that bolt hole right down there in the downpipe. And then for the vacuum tube, I'm going to run a new silicone line for the blow-off valve, but I'll be tapping into this. And then to get into the car, there's a little access right down in here that you can't really see, but all the wiring goes into the fender. So we'll have to remove the fender liner right in here, and then it basically comes in up there behind the fuse panel and everything. So we'll be able to run it all up here and get the thing wired in. Alright guys, so I have the gauges all wired up, but I wanted to test it before I buttoned everything up. It looks like a bit of a mess right now, just because of the way I had to wire it up, but I'll get it all buttoned up and wrapped up as soon as I'm done. The crappy part about the gauge that I got right here, it doesn't have a connector on it. So you have to put the gauge in the pod and then wire it up. So that's why this is set up like it is. But as long as it works when I try it out, I'll be able to wrap it all up and make it look a lot nicer and get it all tucked away. So let's go ahead and give it a try. If I can find my keys. Got them. Alright, so they should turn on with accessory power. And there we go. I really like how these look right next to the gauge cluster because they're right in front of your face, right next to all your other gauges, so it's really easy just to glance down real fast and look at them. And don't be like me and completely destroy your clock. If you're having trouble getting those clips out on the bottom side right here, the top's really easy to get out, it just pops out. But if you have the bottom, have trouble getting the bottom ones out, you can remove all of this, and then you'll be able to use the screwdriver from underneath and pop them out. But As you can see, I completely destroyed mine, but that's okay because I plan on doing the triple gauge pod up there. It'll just be my oil temp, my oil gauge, and then a third gauge. I don't really need a third gauge, so I could do a blank, but I'll probably do like a volt gauge or something like that, just because. But I'm gonna let the car warm up for a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I have for you today. I don't really like how the wiring worked out, just because the boost gauge, how you have to put it inside the pod and then wire it up with your gauge cluster and stuff like that. It's just really hard to do, and I didn't have any extra wire, so I need to either get some extra wire and extend it a little bit, or at least want to get like a 4-pin connector, so if I have to do any work, remove the gauge cluster and anything like that, I can just pull it out. But that's all I have for you today, guys. The next thing is finally what I've been waiting for so long, and that's tuning the car. So I'll actually be able to drive it around with the boost gauge, my AFR gauge. I'll feel safe enough to actually drive it and push it. But that being said, thank you so much for watching, guys. If you like the content or you have any suggestions, please let me know. I'm always looking to improve. But with that being said, I'm super hot. I'm dying in this car. I don't have AC and all the doors are closed. It's like over 100 degrees in here. As you can probably see, I'm sweating really bad. So I'm gonna go ahead and call it. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.